The 7th Ditosian Light Infantry trudged through the mud. Exhaustion was etched on their faces, their packs felt like mountains on their backs. The air hung heavy, thick with humidity and the stench of decay. They had been on patrol for weeks, pushing deep into enemy territory. Their mission scout the movements of the Krill forces. Now, their orders were to march home. The terrain was unforgiving. Dense jungle pressed in on all sides, a suffocating green wall. The sun beat down mercilessly. Every step was a battle against fatigue and the oppressive heat. The soldiers were running on fumes, their bodies pushed to the brink, but they were Ditosian. They were trained to endure. Corporal Garan Eid, a seasoned veteran with a steely gaze, led the column. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, missed nothing as they moved through the dense underbrush. He scanned their surroundings, his hand never far from the energy rifle slung across his chest. The weight of the weapon was a constant reminder of the dangers lurking in the shadows. Eid had seen his fair share of combat. Each scar on his body told a story of survival, of battles fought and comrades lost. He knew the importance of vigilance, especially in this hostile territory. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound could signal an imminent threat. The whispers started somewhere in the middle of the formation and spread like wildfire. Nervous murmurs about their mission, doubts about their orders. The men were questioning the orders. Why were they taking such a perilous path? Why march through the heart of enemy territory when a safer route existed? Eid understood their concerns. He shared them. But orders were orders. The command had its reasons, even if they were not privy to them. He had a duty to his men, a responsibility to bring them home. Each face in the column was a life he was sworn to protect. He silenced the grumbling with a sharp word, reminding them of their training and discipline. They were soldiers, and soldiers followed orders. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. An instinct honed by years of combat experience gnawed at him. The jungle was too quiet. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, replaced by an eerie silence. The air crackled with an unsettling tension. Every soldier felt it, a collective unease that made their movements more cautious, their senses more alert. They were walking into the unknown, and the unknown was rarely kind. The first blast ripped through the trees, the sharp crack of energy fire echoing through the jungle. Then all hell broke loose. The Krill. They had walked into an ambush. Energy bolts sizzled through the air, cutting down men like wheat before the scythe. The jungle exploded in a cacophony of gunfire, screams, and the sickening thud of bodies hitting the ground. Edie hit the dirt, his heart pounding in his chest. "Ambush!" he roared, his voice barely audible above the din. "Form a perimeter, return fire!" His words were met with a desperate scramble as the soldiers, caught off guard but not broken, fought back with the ferocity of cornered animals. Eid, his mind racing, assessed the situation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped. He had to act fast. "Dazzle grenades," he bellowed, his voice hoarse. "Blind them." Two of his men, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, scrambled for the grenades on their belts. The hiss of the grenades followed, then blinding flashes of light erupted in the green gloom. The Krill, momentarily blinded, their fire slackening, became easy targets. "Pull back! Fall back to the ridge!" Eid shouted, using the brief respite to organize a fighting retreat. The Ditosians, firing blindly into the flashing lights, scrambled to their feet, using the confusion to retreat. Eid, covering their retreat, emptied his rifle into the enemy ranks, each shot a desperate prayer. Section 5, Shadows in the Forest. They regrouped on the ridge, a small band of survivors gasping for breath, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. Their once proud formation was reduced to a handful of frightened men. Casualties were heavy, and the weight of their losses was almost unbearable. Too many good men lay dead or dying back in the green hell, their sacrifices haunting the survivors every step. Eid, his face grim and eyes steely, took stock of their dire situation, knowing the odds were against them. They were low on ammunition, hopelessly outnumbered, and stranded deep in enemy territory, with no immediate hope of reinforcements. They were now the hunted, every rustle in the underbrush a potential threat. The jungle, once familiar and almost a second home, had transformed into a deadly labyrinth, each step fraught with peril. The air throbbed with the echoes of the recent battle, a constant reminder of the chaos they had narrowly escaped. The smell of ozone and blood hung heavy, mingling with the dense, humid air, creating an almost suffocating atmosphere. Eid, despite the overwhelming odds stacked against them, refused to give up. His determination was a beacon of hope for his men. He had to get his men home. They were Ditosian. They would not break. Their spirit, though battered, remained unbroken, and their resolve was as strong as ever. Section 6, Weight of Command. As the shadows lengthened, Eid felt the crushing weight of command. He had made life or death decisions in the heat of battle. He had sent men into harm's way. He had seen their faces etched with fear and determination moments before they fell. He bore the burden of leadership, the knowledge that their survival rested on his shoulders. He looked at the faces of his men, their eyes reflecting the horrors they had witnessed. He saw their exhaustion, their fear, but also their unwavering resolve. They were still fighting, they were still alive, and as long as they were alive, there was hope. He would get them home. He had to. Section 7, A Glimmer of Hope. The jungle was relentless. Days blurred into nights. Sleep, when it came, was fitful, haunted by nightmares and the ever-present threat of the krill. The men were starving, their bodies pushed to the limits of endurance. But amidst the despair, a glimmer of hope emerged. They stumbled upon a krill supply cache, hidden deep within the jungle. Food, water, medical supplies, it was a godsend. The discovery breathed new life into the weary soldiers. They devoured the rations with an almost primal hunger, the simple act of eating a temporary reprieve from the horrors they had endured. The supplies wouldn't last long, but they offered a fighting chance, a flicker of hope in the dark heart of the jungle. Section 8, The Price of Survival. Survival came at a price. They were forced to scavenge, to steal from their enemy, to do whatever it took to stay alive. The lines between right and wrong blurred. The jungle was a harsh teacher, stripping away their humanity, leaving only the primal instinct to survive. Eid witnessed the transformation in his men. The easy camaraderie of the barracks was gone, replaced by a grim determination. They had seen too much, experienced too much. They were no longer the same men who had marched into the jungle. They were hardened survivors, forged in the crucible of war. Section 9, Last Stand. They knew their luck wouldn't hold. The krill were relentless, their pursuit never-ending. The inevitable final confrontation came on a nondescript hilltop. The Ditosians, outnumbered and outgunned, prepared for their last stand. They had nothing left to lose but their lives. Eid, his energy rifle almost empty, looked at his men. They were few, but they were ready. He saw the same fire in their eyes, the same refusal to yield. They were Ditosian. They would fight to the bitter end. "For Ditos!" he roared, his voice hoarse but filled with defiance. "For home!" Section 10, One of the Few. The krill assault was relentless, a tidal wave of energy, fire, and fury. The Ditosians fought back with the courage of the damned, their weapons spitting defiance. But they were overwhelmed. One by one they fell, their bodies riddled with energy blasts. Eid, his body a symphony of pain, fought on, his rifle spitting its last bolt. He stood alone, the last man standing, surrounded by the bodies of his comrades. He had failed them. He had promised to bring them home. Now he was the only one left. He closed his eyes, waiting for the end. It never came. He opened his eyes to see a Ditosian gunship hovering overhead, its cannons blazing. Section 11, Echoes of Valor. Eid stumbled back to the base, the sole survivor of his squad. His steps were heavy, each one a reminder of the comrades he had lost in the dense, unforgiving jungle. He was hailed as a hero, a symbol of Ditosian courage and resilience. The ceremony was grand, with medals and honors bestowed upon him, but the weight of those accolades felt like chains. But there was no joy in his victory, only a profound sense of loss. The cheers and applause of the crowd were drowned out by the silence of his fallen friends. The faces of his fallen comrades haunted his dreams. Every night, he saw their eyes, heard their voices, and felt the crushing guilt of being the one who survived. Their sacrifice weighed heavily on his soul. He carried their memories with him, a constant reminder of the price of war. He was one of the few who had returned. The battlefield had claimed so many, and the weight of survival was a burden he bore alone. He wore their memory like a shroud. At every remembrance ceremony, he stood in silence, honoring those who had given everything. The jungle had taken its toll, leaving him scarred both physically and emotionally. Each scar told a story of survival, of battles fought and comrades lost. He was a survivor, forever marked by the horrors he had witnessed. The trauma of war was etched into his very being, a constant shadow that followed him. But he was also a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who fight for something greater than themselves, for their comrades, for their home. His strength was not just in his survival, but in his unwavering dedication to the memory of his fallen brothers. They were the Ditosian Light Infantry, and their sacrifice would never be forgotten. Their legacy lived on in the hearts of those who remembered, in the stories told, and in the silent, solemn tributes paid by survivors like Eid. Again, not too bad, but there is a pronounced difference between my writing, where I intervene with rising actions to counter rampant testimony, and pure LLM/LNN/MLM generated text, one of the few Eid Arajakal rescue from Gavin Eid Delta. It had been an arduous tour of duty on the border for the 7th Ditosian Light Infantry. 3 months of seemingly endless patrols while avoiding the concentrated enemy minefields and well-equipped snipers. They had lost 2 men, and a further 6 were wounded, but they had exacted a heavy toll on the Moranians, eliminating at least 5 of them. Several blood trails led off into a tangled and heavily overgrown area after an intense contact that suggested that more of the maligned enemy had been killed. There was certainly no love lost between the 2 rival empires after 12 years of territorial disputes and border skirmishes. The orders for marching home to their firebase, some 33 kilometers away, had not been popular. Corporal Garan Eid's section was on the verge of mutiny. "The 5th had HPCs won," echoed a voice of dissension from the group of disgruntled soldiers. "Yeah," whined Private Dessig, the section's charismatic veteran gunner, "and they only did a 2-month tour." Corporal Eid was not a huge man, but his medium frame was tempered and toned. He was an experienced soldier, and he knew that his men were weary. Some of them had only been with the Ditosian Grand Army for 9 months, but had they already forgotten the punishment for insubordination? As Eid was looking over the electronic topographical map, the muffled discussion in the background annoyed him greatly. "Get your gear together. We move out tinned up in 20 minutes. Like reluctant dogs, the section began pulling down their camouflaged individual shelters and strapping on what they weren't wearing of their titanium alloy plate armor. Lance Imrian Pitek was just about at the end of his tether. 30-plus kilometers of marching in his heavy furnace-like plate armor did not appeal to him at all. He decided to make the trip a little easier. After making his way down to the latrine pit, he emptied most of the water from his canteens and all of the ammunition from his magazines into it. Then he took his entrenching tool and buried the diamond-tipped bullets. "Form up!" the familiar voice of Sipil Eid bellowed out. The tired infantrymen moved into a line, encumbered by their weapons, equipment, and armor. "Return!" Then Eid paused momentarily. "Forward march!" It was only 10.00 hours, and already hot perspiration was rolling down the necks and chests of the helmeted and battle-laden warriors. They met up with the other sections as arranged about a half-mile up the rough, narrow road. Ahead lay a forest of marble bark. Further south there were cultivated fields. Beyond that, on the River Colossus, Firebase Gavin awaited the 7th's return. In 3 loose ranks they marched through the dense, heavy woodland. Sipil Eid, sweating profusely and weary, turned to silence one of his men when something metallic and rectangular caught his eye on one of the large marble-bark trees. Before he could open his mouth to shout anything, there were bright flashes from left and right. At the same instant, there was a sudden and thunderous roar. Fragments of stone-hard wood blurred across the road from both sides. The massive trees had exploded near their roots and were tumbling down, crushing most of the Ditosians. Through the dust and over the sound of screaming victims, there was the loud and rapid whine of bullets. Futile as it was to try to be heard above the surrounding din, Eid roared, "Ambush 1, HPC, Hover personnel carrier." Effective small arms fire was pouring in from in front and behind. The capable tactical fighting unit was being decimated. Eid saw that the marble bark splintered limbs and trunks had crushed at least half of the men in his briefly over his shoulder to see that he still had Dessig and therefore the machine gun. In the confusion of the swirling cloud of hot, choking dust, Private Thren stood up. Deafening lines of phosphorus marked the air as the projectiles neared him. "Get down, Thren!" howled Lance Pitek. Thren turned slightly to face Pitek with a strange expression as his stomach erupted into an immense blue fireball. With a sickening sound, his backbone crumpled from the intense heat, and he fell in two, still burning, pieces to the ground. "What the fuck are we going to do, Eid?" yelled Private Tevlin, panicking. He was clutching his rifle and trying to conceal himself in the fallen timber. Eid was thinking, still hearing the sounds of his men dying, about those mysterious bullets that pierced their armor as if they weren't wearing any and then engulfed them in a searing blast of lurid azure flames. The Moranians have never used ammunition like this before, he thought as he surveyed the scene. The unit is doomed. We must withdraw. Edie gave the signal for the two remaining riflemen he could see to follow him. "Dessig! Covering fire, now!" he wailed. The gun thumped rapidly, sending its diamond-tipped missiles hurtling blindly through the grey forest. The three infantrymen sprang forward, assault rifles ready at the hip. Like rabbits, they scurried, not checking left or right, through the spider's web of tracer that scalded brightly the air around them. Some distance ahead, Tevlin's stinging eyes saw camouflaged figures behind the muzzle flashes of their Moranian rifles. They were aiming accurately at the three swiftly running targets. Towers of brightly burning blue flames sprang up from the ground around what remained of Garen's section as they dived into a shallow hollow in the earth. Tevlin returned fire, and Pitek, lying flat and motionless except for his nervous shivering, wished he had not ditched his ammunition. "Eyes!" Eid roared as he reefed the pin from the base of the dazzle grenade that he had grabbed feverishly from his webbing. Climbing immediately onto one knee, he threw the stick-like ordnance about 2/3 of the way to the nearest enemy soldier. Eid, Tevlin and Pitek all covered their eyes with their hands as they were trained to do instinctively when one of their comrades shouts, "Eyes!" The visual radiation from one of these incapacitating devices was enough to blind you through your eyelids. With a buzzing sound, the half-inch thick metallic element fused inside the hexagonal prism-like head. The forest lit up as if a bright white star had descended through the trees. The Moranian barrage continued after the sky-bleaching flash, though their shots seemed to be fired blindly, no longer so close to the desperate survivors. "Let's go, men!" shouted C-Pillar Eid as he sprung to his feet. Pitek was running with him within a second. Tevlin took up his assault rifle from the ground directly in front of him, where he had placed it before his section commander used the dazzle grenade. Through the built-in scope, his cold ocean blue eye saw the upper body of one of the grey-green woodland pattern-swathed, heavily armored Moranians. He was stumbling blindly forward, almost tripping on a stump. Tevlin gritted his teeth in anger as he fired 2 3-round bursts into his target's chest and head. Only 1 or 2 of the bullets deflected off his enemy's utopian plate and combat helmet. The grisly remains of the perforated corpse fell forward into the undergrowth whilst gushing many fountains of blood. Tevlin smiled grimly as he rose to his feet and sprinted after his 2 compatriots. Into the dense forest on the other side of the road they ran, high-velocity bullets still smashing and igniting the solid wood that surrounded them all. After working their way through the uncompromising thicket for about 5 minutes, the volleys of shots died down. The only gunfire that could be heard was that of the Moranians mopping up what was left of the once proud Detosian 7th Light Infantry Squadron. Eid, Tevlin and Pitek continued to struggle through the rough marble bark saplings away from the ambush site as the sun was beginning to set. Corporal. Eid cautiously led his 2 remaining subordinates into a small clearing. He signaled that he wanted to talk to Pitek and Tevlin, who were patrolling their arcs of fire behind him. "We'll stay here until dawn, and then try to find a way back to Gavin. What do you think?" he said, keeping his vocal tone and volume low in case there were Moranian patrols in the general vicinity. "How much ammo have you got?" asked Lance Pitek of both of them. "I used all of mine in that firefight." "Here," groaned Tevlin, handing him a full 35-round magazine. "I've only got about 60 rounds left." Ada gave him a half-filled mag and said ruefully, "I've only got 1 other." Imrian Petek was not the bravest of the soldiers in the DGA-1. His promotion to Lance was largely due to his popularity with his superiors, and not actually because of any outstanding military expertise. He was beginning to realize the gravity of their situation. "We're fucked, aren't we?" he hissed cynically. No one answered. Lance, Imri and Petek took the first shift as sentry as darkness descended around the three isolated men of battle. Many thoughts plagued Garan Eid as he tried to sleep. Had the Moranians declared full-scale war, and if so, were he and his 2 men behind their front line, 3 riflemen and about 100 rounds? Eid thought, that isn't really enough to break through. We only have 8 days to reach an outpost of the Ditosian Grand Army, or we will be considered defectors or deserters and shot on sight. The Ditosian Grand Army had suffered many casualties in the previous spiteful conflict because the Moranians' Neural scoured 2 prisoners of war and then returned them to their units, reprogrammed to murder their fellow soldiers when they were least prepared for it. And what of Alcara? Strange dreams disturbed Sepiel Eid as he slept restlessly. His wife Alcara featured heavily, as did the pride of the Ditosian Air Armada, the DRS-3 Dominia, the largest and most heavily armed air dreadnought ever constructed. There was also another disconcerting vision, that of an elongated old man's face, the face of a Major Delta. All of these images faded rapidly 3 hours before dawn when Private Ahali Tevelin shook his leg by the foot. "Your shift, Corp," he whispered softly. Grateful to be away from the nightmare of slumber, Eid briskly opened his eyes. "Yeah, thanks, Tev," he whispered back and reached for his assault rifle. He looked at the contents of his bum pack. The electronic map was still functional despite a large crack in the display screen. Eid would have appreciated being able to use it, but the electronic scanning equipment that the Moranians would be using would register its signal within about 3 kilometers. He would have to rely on a conventional chart, on which he knew their position to within about 5 kilometers. There was also about 3 days' worth of compressed rations, 2 dazzle grenades, 4 half-full water canteens, a Claymore 4-style mine and detonator, and the weapon toolkit for his rifle. 1. DGA, Ditosian Grand Army. 2. Neural Scourer, an advanced form of electronic brainwashing device. 3. Ditosian revered ship. 4. Claymore mine, an ancient Earth design for a ballistic mine that blasts hundreds of metal spheres out in an arc of about 60 degrees to a height of 2 to 3 m. The original design was modified and replicated after Ditosian HIDIS researchers found its data several decades previously. About an hour later, Eid had woken Tevelin and Petek. "We'll head south and try to get to Gavin as soon as possible. Tevelin, scout," Eid had said, making a pointing gesture with his 3 middle fingers. The marble bark thinned slightly as they trundled their way slowly southward. The journey had continued without incident for about 2 hours when Tevelin saw and heard a creak ahead in the distance. Private Ahali Tevelin immediately dropped onto one knee and gave Eid the undulating field signal for a water obstacle ahead. Corporal Eid carefully made his way up to Tevelin's position. "We don't have time to find a way around. We'll have to cross." Eid spoke in a quiet way when he was in dangerous territory and only when was compelled to. Garan signaled Imrian to take a covering position about 20 meters forward and to the right, where the ground was slightly elevated. He scuttled rapidly to where his commander's hand had indicated, his plate armor clinking as he moved. "Another fucking creek," Lance Petek thought. "Wet fucking clothes, wet fucky. What the fuck?" His eyes fell upon 2 beautiful young women who seemed to be unaware of his presence. One, a brunette, was seated, washing clothes in the slowly running waterway. The other, auburn-haired girl was splashing and swimming. Her ample breasts were exposed and just visible below the waterline. Imrian Petek had not seen a woman in 3 months and had not been with one in 6. A sly smile crossed his face as he gave his corporal a hand signal that indicated that he was going to do a reconnaissance of the obstacle. "What is this squeezer doing?" thought Eid with barely contained wrath. Imrian slung his assault rifle so as not to alarm these buxom beauties and began to wade into the cold creek water. He called out to them delicately across the rippling stream, "Hello there." Through a high-powered periscopic scope on the other side of the creek, one set of Moranian eyes watched the scene. "Acknowledge front," demanded the whispered order. Another Moranian in the crowded trench was operating a black metallic control box that had a rope of many colored wires leading from it through the sandy soil and down to the edge of the water and into the hologram projector. Smiles and waves greeted Imrian as he neared the chest-high depths at the center of the slow-running waterway. He was about to introduce himself to the ladies when the commander of the Moranians' gloved finger toggled a switch on his belt. The creek seemed to explode from beneath into a translucent solid gel as the hydrogel charges that had been strategically placed on the creek bed discharged. Petek's expression sublimated from joyous enthusiasm to that of abject shock and terrorized horror at once. He had not followed DGA procedure to activate the detection equipment on his rifle that would have warned him of the danger. Lance Imrian Petek's mind filled with images from the training holo footage that showed what happened in a situation such as this. He knew that at any moment there would be weapons fired at him. Struggling to move in the heavy medium, he reached for his Sever bayonet. By this time, Eid was nearing the edge of the creek. Tevelin had moved up to the higher ground on the right. They had witnessed the water erupting into a gel and knew that Petek was as good as dead. The two soldiers scanned the opposite bank with seasoned eyes as their comrade worked feverishly with his sever-sharp diamond-bladed bayonet to cut his way through the thick, undulating mass the water had become. Still, there was no volley of deadly projectiles. Petek hoped dearly that somehow he could make it back to his friends. The female images resumed doing what they were when the men first arrived. Perspiration beaded on Imrian Petek's deeply furrowed brow as he made steady progress through the hydrogel. He had reached to within 5 meters of the edge when the tension became too much for him and he yelled, "Help me, Ahali!" Private Ahali Tevelin was an obedient soldier. In the blink of an eye, he had his Sever bayonet out of its scabbard and gripping his assault rifle firmly by the carry handle in the other hand. He leopard crawled as fast as he could manage towards his superior. "Execute!" was the command that thundered from inside the gun pit. 2 camouflage trench covers were blasted pneumatically upwards, corkscrewing 10 meters into the air amidst fragments of gravel and clods of dirt and grass. This blast was followed immediately by 8 armored and helmeted Moranians popping up out of the short trenches, firing deliberate automatic bursts at Petek and Tevelin. The bullets striking the gel produced an odd squeaking sound. Very soon, Imrian Petek's hysterical screaming almost completely drowned this out. He had been hit in the forearm and the Euphorium-1 bullet had penetrated his DGA standard titanium plate. CPL Garan Eid could see the situation clearly from behind a fallen log where he had positioned himself. "Not again," was the thought that hammered itself into his mind. The bank around Private Tevelin erupted with the impact of hundreds of Euphorium bullets. A loud, rapid ostinado of sounds emanated from the flying dirt and fragments of Ahali Tevelin and his armor. To Eid's horror, he glared from Lance Petek's desperately flailing form to Tevelin's bullet-massacred, obviously lifeless body falling unceremoniously to the sodden ground. It was clear to Eid that he was now on his own unless some miracle could save his second-in-command. The veteran of 3 campaigns knew that there was only once chance. He drew his second-last dazzle grenade from one of his pouches at his left side and threw it as quickly as he could into the center of the creek. "Eyes!" Calculating tactical thoughts flashed through his consciousness. "Even if this can't save Petek, it should screen my withdrawal." The blinding grenade bounced slightly on the surface of the gel, and then, just as Imrian Petek felt another high-velocity Euphorium projectile pierce his collarbone, it lit up the general vicinity with its powerful emanation of bright white luminescence. Unfortunately for the 2 surviving Detosians, the visors that were fitted to the helmets of these elite Moranians were photosensitive. They changed to an opaque black when powerful light was brought to bear on them. There was a momentary pause in the echoing sound of multiple rapid automatic fire. Ida raised his face quickly to see Imrian Petek. Despite being shot twice, he had made it to the edge of the creek. He looked in pretty bad shape, half bobbing near the bank, but if he received medical attention, he should live, Garan surmised. The Detosian corporal was springing to his feet to drag him to cover when the air was again filled with whining bullets, some striking Petek in the head, neck and hip. Others were aimed at Eid. Imrian Petek did not even have time to let out a cry of anguish as he and his perforated titanium carapace crashed to the ground amidst the continuing impact of Euphorium on earth, wood, bone and flesh. Edie gritted his teeth until it almost caused him pain before moving swiftly into a firing position around the side of the fallen timber. The talent he had acquired in his many years of intense training and previous action for engaging targets with his assault rifle on 3-round burst was suddenly the only thing that mattered at all. He could see it all as if it was in slow motion. The muzzle flashes of the Moranian weapons barely out of sync with the harsh sounds that accompanied them. A withering hail of bullets, like a dancing wildfire, pounded the ground close to the lone warrior, springing up knee-high towers of dirt and stone-hard wood. It expanded, contracted, and wandered rapidly closer as the Moranians corrected their aim. Spent cartridges streamed 3 by 3 from the ejection port of Ede's assault rifle as the 4 Moranians in the pit on his right stopped or slowed down 2 or 3 diamond-tipped bullets each. Fountains of blood pumped momentarily outward from the enemy soldiers as they fell, domino-style, into the bottom of the rectangular gun pit. Ede was in the process of training his weapon on the other dugout when he was stunned by a sharp impacting sound as a euphorium round deflected off the plate on his left shoulder. Returning fire, he decapitated another Moranian. He had been previously presented with his crossed rifles insignia with good cause. The odds were down to 3 to 1. Corporal Ede had another visor in his crosshairs. That was the instant when Garan Ede felt an almighty tunnel of agony streak its way through his body from his left shoulder to his right calf. There was a flash of indescribable pain, and then everything became distant, dark, and blurry. 1. Euphorium, a black crystalline element that is harder than native diamond. It is commonly known as black diamond. Delta, delta, delta. Master Ka is a fool for facilitating this, Jen uttered in a second-level personal code. The old major scuttled restlessly around the edges of the 2 occupied pools of life. Lit by large bronze torches spouting lurid purple flames, the pools were circular and about 3 meters in diameter. Filled with a shiny black substance that could hardly be water, they reflected the forms of 2 naked Dotosian corpses. The bodies were suspended in the air with their arms and legs extended about a foot from the surface of the liquid. Jen cursed Ka in a 3rd-level encrypted language as he determined how much work was in front of him. Both subjects had been shot and bled to death. The blonde one had only a single wound, but it had managed to find most of his important internal organs. The other had 5 grievous wounds, but would take less time. Yen then began the ritual. He held an almost fist-sized white marble orb in front and above his head. His voice echoed off the stone pillars that supported the roof of the subterranean chamber as he began to chant, Mehir Vinon, Teem Tijer, Merach. With the resounding vocal tones, the dark liquid in the unfathomably deep ponds began to rise in waves. Mehayave non, Tisa, Lagek. The deep rhythmic voice was growing louder and more imposing. At this time, the dark, oily liquid in each pool surged upwards until it splashed against and over the corpses of Corporal Garan Ede and Lance Imrian Petek. Some of it entered their open wounds, and then the strange, highly reflective substance receded back into inactivity. Jen was a powerful magician and resented his talents being employed to resurrect 2 insignificant nons. The chant continued through several different phases, long into the night. Garan Ede awoke to the disconcerting sound of Petek's frantic screaming, a shimmering black reflection, and an intense, almost intolerable itching that seemed to go all the way through his body. Hell, Ede thought. I'm in hell and they are torturing Petek. He attempted to turn his head towards the source of the wailing, but found he could not move an inch. Jen sensed Ede's mental activity. There, they are both alive. If Ka wants them in any better condition than that, he can heal them, thought Jen. With a feeling that was not satisfaction, he picked up his milky white orb, then turned and walked away briskly for a being of 122 years. Ede heard the footsteps receding away. Help us, please, he cried out. Jen had reached the entrance to the large chamber before he projected his whispered reply to Ede. You owe me your life. You will help us. And he was gone. Master Ka, the 2 Dotosian soldiers are now alive, Jen stated respectfully as he entered the Nucleus Master's chamber. You must encrypt your thoughts and words more thoroughly when you curse me, Jen. It annoys me greatly when members of the Inner Order are distracted to inform me of your dissension. said Carr calmly, as if what he had just stated could not possibly be true. "What the fuck is this, Eid?" echoed the desperate cry from Petek. "I don't know, shut the fuck up," barked the corporal. "Silence now!" Carr's soothing yet authoritative voice filled the chamber of pools. Petek's mournful sobs ebbed into the background. "I am Carr. You know my people as the Major." Carr continued. "You have been brought back from death itself by our will. You have incurred a debt. However, it is a debt that you can repay." Ditosians despised the Major almost as much as they did the Moranians. There had been documented occurrences of entire battalions being bewitched by the Major and then engaging in combat with one another, or else marching of cliffs or into oceans. Lance Petek was infuriated. He had also reckoned that he was in hell, and to find out that he was merely a prisoner of the Major made him explode with anger. "You fucking Major bastards! Let me go! I'll fucking kill you, you moth!" His words were cut short as, with a small gesture of his hand, Carr lowered the shouting captive into the pool. A few frothy bubbles later, and without struggle, Lance Imrian Petek was again dead. "I hope that you will consider our proposal more thoroughly before deciding, Mr. Eid," said Carr without the slightest trace of smugness or remorse. Garin had deduced that his companion had drowned and had no desire to, by truly dead yet. "Yes, I will listen," he said like a beaten slave. "Good," Carr responded, and removed a slender black bamboo wand from an inside sleeve under his robes. "I will remove the discomfort that Jen insisted that you have for this time." Master Carr made a neat triangular motion with the wand and closed his eyes momentarily. Garin Eid experienced a sense of invigoration such that he had never felt before. His mortal wound had been irritating him incredibly since he regained consciousness. In an instant, this was gone. "Thank you," said Garin, genuinely grateful. "Cruelty is not a pleasing aspect for us." As Carr spoke, he glanced vacantly in the direction of his greatest healer, and then back at his prisoner. "We have a task that we wish for you to perform." "What do you ask of me?" asked Eid. Carr replied in a neutral tone. "The Ditosian Grand Air Force has 6 air dreadnoughts. Generally, these are of little consequence to us, since our magic has the power to dash them from the sky. That is one of the reasons why, Mr. Eid, that your government has not sent them to engage in battle with us. The other is, as you know, no outsiders know the precise location of our mountain kingdom. There has been a complication, however. A high-ranking member of our order has defected for reasons I cannot begin to fathom to your country. This Major, Xamanak One, is very sagacious and knowledgeable, but I can still sift through the thoughts he has in dreams. He intends to protect the flagship of the Air Armada, DRS, Dominia, from our powers and direct it towards us. You have been selected as part of an elite group of individuals that will rid Earth of DRS Dominia." Eid's thoughts fleeted back to when he was being trained in the Ditosian Grand Army. "Defectors will be tortured for 21 days and then shot. Their families will be tortured for 21 days and then released minus fingers, toes, and sexual organs. This order is paramount, and although an Omnicorps matter, it will be executed by any member of the Ditosian Grand Army upon recognition of a traitor or his family." "Alcara," said Carr, reading thoughts directly from Garin's mind. "Yes, your wife would surely be tortured and disfigured if you were discovered. You haven't seen what they do. Please, at least let me bring her here, away from the Omnicorps. They aren't human." Carr pretended to consider this carefully. He had already foreseen this event. "We would have to ensure that you would not betray our service." He motioned the short black wand upwards. Eid's body rose with it. For the first time, he could see his new masters. They were only about 5.5 feet tall, both with flowing long white beards that almost reached the ground. Jen was wearing the color the Major associated with healing, a deep purple. Master Carr, who had a blue-red triangular tattoo on the center of his forehead, wore off-white robes with platinum trim. Their slender features and demeanor defined them as being of the Major as much as their short stature. Carr then reached into his robes and produced 2 jeweled red-gold braces. He threw them into the air. They did not fall to the ground. Instead, they clamped around each of Garin's wrists with a clearly audible mechanical sound. "What a..." Eid began to ask. Carr raised his hands slowly. "These are manacles of Damocles. If you disobey us, they will sever your hands. Do I have your loyalty, Mr. Eid?" "Yes," answered Garin Eid, more concerned about how he was going to get his wife out of Ditosian territory. Your wife, yes, Alcara. Ka paused briefly. You may have 3 weeks to retrieve her and return with her here to Cereves. Then you will fulfill your obligation to us, and then you will be released. Ka noted with hidden personal satisfaction the relief which he had anticipated that swept over Eid's face. He continued, as you are well aware, ours is not the only magic on Earth. Your government even employs some of those whom excel in a few simplistic forms of it. We have enlisted the services of a practitioner of one of the elemental ways to accompany you, said Ka, drawing out the words enlisted and accompany. Ka noticed the expression on his prisoner's face that indicated his displeasure at being exposed and dripping slippery black fluid. The Nucleus Master made a motion with his empty hand, at which a cotton robe that began from a single thread had woven itself around the soldier's body. Ida smiled weakly and nodded for Ka to continue. Your equipment awaits you, spoke Ka in an unemotional fashion. He moved Garan telekinetically until his feet were on the massive, solid stone blocks of the chamber floor. He then directed his new servant with a small gesture to the pile of Detosian weapons and armor in a recess in the wall. You will follow Jen to the Chamber of Gates. There you will meet Arajakal. He will assist you in your efforts to retrieve your wife. If you do not return in 3 weeks, you will lose both of your hands. I assume that I am understood? I understand, replied Eid in a low, shamed tone.